I'm 58 years old, Judy Mason, a hard-working farmer who inherited our family's 120-acre property in Montana. Today was supposed to be the happiest day of my life, my only daughter Amanda's wedding. Instead, it turned into a nightmare when my new son-in-law Tony publicly demanded I hand over my farm keys. When I refused, he slapped me in front of 200 guests. I walked away and made a call that changed everything. I'm about to share a story about the power of courage. Let me know where you're watching from, and hit that subscribe button if you value standing up for what's rightfully yours. The morning sun filtered through the kitchen window as I poured my coffee, gazing out at the rolling fields that stretched toward the mountains. My farm in Montana had been in our family for 3 generations, passed down from my grandparents to my parents, and finally to me. 120 acres of land that had witnessed births, deaths, triumphs, and heartbreaks, including the loss of my beloved husband Harold 8 years ago. Harold and I had planned to grow old together on this land. I still remember how his eyes would crinkle at the corners when he smiled watching the sunset from our porch swing. But a sudden heart attack took him from me, leaving me to manage the farm and raise our daughter Amanda alone. "This land doesn't just grow crops, Judy girl," Harold used to say. "It grows our family's story." Those words became my mantra during the difficult years that followed his passing. Amanda was 19 when her father died already, in her first year at the University of Washington studying business. She'd always been bright and ambitious, qualities I encouraged even though they took her far from the farm. After Harold's death, her visits became less frequent as she built her life in Seattle. Maintaining the farm without Harold proved challenging. Montana winters were unforgiving, and agricultural prices fluctuated wildly. There were nights I sat at our old kitchen table, surrounded by bills, wondering how I'd make it through another season. The bank approached me twice about selling, but I refused. This wasn't just land. It was where my parents and grandparents were buried in our small family plot near the apple orchard. It was where Amanda took her first steps, where Harold and I had danced under the stars on summer nights. Slowly, I adapted. I shifted from traditional crops to organic produce, supplying high-end restaurants in Bozeman and Missoula. I converted one of the old barns into a farm store selling homemade jams, freshly baked bread, and seasonal vegetables. The work was exhausting, but fulfilling, and gradually the farm became profitable again. My life fell into a comfortable rhythm until Amanda called 2 years ago announcing she was bringing her new boyfriend home for Thanksgiving. "You'll love him, Mom," she said, her voice bubbling with excitement. "Tony's amazing, so smart and successful." I cleaned the farmhouse from top to bottom before their arrival, eager to meet the man who had captured my daughter's heart. Maybe too eager, I realized later. Maybe I should have looked more carefully for the warning signs. The moment Tony Clark stepped out of his sleek black SUV, I sensed something wasn't quite right. He was handsome in a polished way, tailored clothes, carefully styled dark hair, and a smile that appeared practiced. At 35, he was 7 years older than Amanda and carried himself with the confidence of someone accustomed to getting what he wanted. "Mrs. Mason," he greeted me with a firm handshake. "Amanda's told me so much about this charming little farm of yours." Little farm. The description felt dismissive, but I brushed it aside, attributing it to city perspective. I welcomed him warmly, wanting to make a good impression for Amanda's sake. During dinner that first evening, Tony dominated the conversation with stories about his real estate development business in Seattle. He asked questions about the farm that seemed innocent enough at first: how many acres we had, what crops we grew, how long the property had been in our family. "This place must be worth a small fortune now," he remarked, cutting into the roast beef I'd prepared. "Agricultural land near scenic areas is prime for development. Have you ever considered selling?" "The farm isn't for sale," I replied firmly. "It's been in our family for generations." Tony nodded, but I caught the calculating look in his eyes before he smoothly changed the subject. The next morning, I found him studying the property boundaries, walking the perimeter, with a focused expression. When I approached, he quickly explained he was just admiring the beautiful landscape. Later that day, I discovered him in Harold's old office looking through some paperwork. "Sorry," he said with a charming smile that didn't reach his eyes. "I was looking for Amanda and got curious. This place could really benefit from modern management techniques. Have you digitized any of your records?" Throughout their 4-day visit, Tony made subtle comments about how the farm was stuck in the past and needed professional oversight. More troubling was how Amanda began echoing his sentiments. "Mom, you work so hard," she said as they were preparing to leave. "Maybe Tony's right. You could modernize, hire more help, or even consider developing part of the property." After they left, I called my best friend Martha, who lived on the neighboring farm. We'd been friends for 30 years, sharing everything from childcare to equipment. "I don't know, Martha," I confided as we sat on my porch. "Something about Tony bothers me. The way he kept asking about property values and ownership papers." Martha's expression grew serious. "Trust your instincts, Judy. I've seen similar situations with my cousin Diane. Her daughter married a man who seemed charming at first, but he was after their family business. Be careful." Over the next few months, Tony and Amanda visited 3 more times. With each visit, Tony became more brazen in his inquiries about the farm. During their spring visit, he asked to see financial statements, claiming he wanted to help me organize my affairs. When I politely refused, anger flashed across his face before he quickly recovered. "I'm just trying to help Judy. Amanda worries about you managing all this alone." That evening, I tried talking to Amanda privately. "Honey, I appreciate the concern, but I'm doing fine. The farm is profitable, and I have good help." "Mom, you're being paranoid," Amanda responded, her voice tinged with irritation. "Tony has experience with property management. He's just trying to help." I recognized the phrases as "Tony's not my daughter's." She'd never spoken to me that way before, and it broke my heart to see the distance growing between us. Just 8 months after they'd started dating, Amanda called with news of their engagement. "We're getting married in September," she announced, "and Tony thinks the farm would be the perfect venue." "Don't you think that's rushing things?" I asked carefully. "When you know," she replied, repeating what sounded like another one of Tony's phrases. "And we're not doing a prenuptial agreement. Tony says they're for people who don't trust each other." That statement sent alarm bells ringing in my mind. No prenuptial agreement meant Tony could potentially claim part of anything Amanda might inherit, including, eventually, my farm. I tried to suggest she protect herself legally, but she shut down the conversation immediately. As their September wedding date approached, my concerns only deepened. What had started as unease had grown into genuine fear that I might lose everything my family had built. Once the wedding date was set, Tony took control of every detail with an intensity that seemed excessive. Though I offered to help with planning, he insisted on making all decisions, from the flowers to the menu to the seating arrangements. "The farm is just the backdrop," he told me when I suggested incorporating some family traditions. "Amanda and I want something modern and sophisticated." Though the wedding was at my farm, most of the 200 guests were Tony's business associates and connections. Only a handful were Amanda's friends from college and work. When I asked about inviting our extended family and neighbors who'd known Amanda since childhood, Tony claimed they needed to limit numbers for budget reasons, despite the fact that I was covering most expenses. In the weeks leading up to the wedding, Tony began showing up at the farm unannounced, often when Amanda wasn't with him. He would walk the property, taking photos and making notes. Once I found him measuring the old barn, claiming he was just getting ideas for the wedding decoration. 3 weeks before the ceremony, I returned early from a supply run to Bozeman and discovered Tony in Harold's office rifling through the filing cabinet where I kept property deeds and financial documents. "What are you doing?" I demanded, my heart pounding. He didn't even look embarrassed. "Just helping organize things before the wedding. This place is a mess, Judy. You really should let me help you modernize your record keeping." That night, I carefully checked my documents. Nothing seemed missing, but I couldn't shake the feeling that Tony had copied information. Amanda began staying in Seattle, more calling rather than visiting. During these calls, she'd casually mention how Tony thinks you should consider early retirement, or Tony knows someone who could help manage the farm operations. The pressure was subtle but persistent, and I began to feel increasingly isolated. Even Amanda seemed different, more distant, parroting Tony's opinions rather than expressing her own. 2 weeks before the wedding, Martha invited me for coffee. Her expression was grave as she slid a business card across the table. "This is my nephew Michael," she said. "He's a lawyer specializing in estate planning and elder law. I think you should talk to him." "Elder law? I'm only 58, Martha," I protested. "It's not about age, Judy. It's about protecting what's yours. Just talk to him, please." I met with Michael the next day. He was a kind, serious young man who listened carefully as I explained my concerns. "Based on what you've described, Mrs. Mason, I'd recommend updating your will immediately and creating a trust for the farm," he advised. "And don't sign anything without legal review, especially around the wedding." With Michael's help, I quietly updated my legal documents, ensuring the farm would be protected. He also gave me his card telling me to call day or night if I needed assistance. Just days before the wedding, I spotted Tony walking the north pasture with a man I didn't recognize. Through binoculars, I watched them gesturing at the land, the stranger taking notes. When I asked Tony about it later, he claimed the man was just a wedding photographer scouting locations. But I'd seen the man's business card when they returned to their car, Apex Development Group. A quick internet search revealed they specialized in converting agricultural properties into luxury resorts and residential communities. The final straw came the night before the wedding, when Amanda approached me with what she called a simple request. "Mom, Tony thinks it would be easier if you gave us spare keys to the house and office. You know, in case anything needs attention during the honeymoon." The look in her eyes, pleading but somehow rehearsed, broke my heart. This wasn't my confident, independent daughter speaking. This was someone under another's influence. "The farm staff has keys," I replied carefully. "They know what to do." Amanda's face hardened. "You don't trust Tony, do you? After everything he's trying to do for you, for us." "It's not about trust, Amanda. It's about boundaries." She walked away without another word, and I spent the night before my daughter's wedding crying into my pillow, wondering where my sweet child had gone, and fearing what the next day might bring. The morning of Amanda's wedding dawned clear and beautiful, the kind of perfect September day that makes Montana famous. Golden light spilled across the fields as farm workers and the wedding staff Tony had hired transformed our property. I dressed carefully in the pale blue suit I'd chosen months ago, when my heart had been full of joy rather than dread. Looking in the mirror, I pinned on the antique pearl brooch that had belonged to my grandmother. Something old. Something borrowed from the past to face an uncertain future. By noon, cars began arriving. Expensive vehicles with Seattle and Portland license plates filled the parking area we'd created in the East Field. I stood greeting guests I'd never met, feeling like a stranger on my own land. Amanda looked stunning in her gown, a modern design that Tony had selected. When I went to her room to help with final preparations, she seemed nervous but determined. "You look beautiful, honey," I said, trying to bridge the growing gap between us. "Thanks, Mom." Her smile didn't reach her eyes. "Is everything set up the way Tony wanted? Not the way we wanted. The way Tony wanted. The distinction spoke volumes. Walking my daughter down the aisle, where my husband should have been, was bittersweet. I felt Harold's absence acutely as I placed Amanda's hand in Tony's, noting his triumphant smile as the minister began the ceremony. The reception began at 4, held in the decorated barn that had been transformed with crystal chandeliers and white roses, all signs of its agricultural purpose carefully hidden. Wine flowed freely, and Tony consumed glass after glass as he worked the room introducing Amanda to important contacts. By 7 o'clock, when it was time for toasts, Tony was visibly intoxicated. He clinked his glass repeatedly until the room fell silent, then stood swaying slightly as he surveyed the crowd. "I want to thank everyone for coming to celebrate our special day." He began his words slightly slurred. "Especially those of you who flew in from Seattle to this remote location." Laughter rippled through his business associates, while our local guests shifted uncomfortably. "Many of you have asked about our future plans," Tony continued, placing his hand possessively on Amanda's shoulder. "Well, I'm excited to announce that we'll be making some big changes around here." My stomach clenched as he gestured grandly around the barn. "This quaint little farm is going to be transformed into Montana's premier luxury resort and residential community. Apex Development is already drawing up plans to break ground next spring." Gasps and murmurs spread through the crowd. Martha caught my eye from across the room, her expression alarmed. "The Mason family farm will become Mason Estates," Tony announced proudly, "a fitting tribute to Amanda's heritage while bringing this outdated property into the 21st century. I stood frozen as he continued outlining plans for golf courses and luxury cabins where my fields currently grew organic vegetables. Amanda looked surprised, but didn't interrupt him. Her expression conflicted. "And now," Tony said, turning to face me directly, "I think it's time for a wedding gift, Mom." The way he said Mom made my skin crawl. "We'll need the keys to the office and the safe where all the property documents are kept, tonight." 200 pairs of eyes turned toward me. Friends, neighbors, and strangers waited for my response. "I'm sorry, Tony," I said, my voice surprisingly steady, "but the farm isn't for sale or development, and those documents remain private." Tony's face darkened, his charm vanishing instantly. "Don't be difficult, Judy. Amanda agrees it's for the best. Don't you, honey?" He squeezed my daughter's shoulder tight enough that I saw her wince. "The farm has been in our family for generations," I said, addressing my words to Amanda rather than Tony. "It's not just land to be developed, it's our heritage." "Your heritage is outdated," Tony snapped, stepping toward me. "You're an old woman trying to cling to the past. Hand over the keys, now." "No," I said simply. What happened next occurred so quickly that many guests later said they couldn't believe their eyes. Tony's hand shot out, striking me across the face with such force that I stumbled backward, nearly falling. The sound of the slap echoed through the suddenly silent barn. For a moment, no one moved. Amanda stood with her hands over her mouth. Martha half rose from her seat. My cheek burned with pain and humiliation. Without a word, I straightened, my spine turned, and walked steadily toward the barn door. Behind me, I heard Tony's voice rising. "Where do you think you're going? This isn't finished." But it was finished. With shaking hands, I took out my cell phone and dialed the number on Michael's card. "I need help," I said quietly when he answered. "Right now." Michael arrived at the farm 20 minutes later, accompanied by Sheriff Davis, whom I'd known for years. By then, the wedding reception had devolved into chaos. Tony, further inflamed by alcohol, was loudly proclaiming his rights to his wife's inheritance, while guests uncomfortably looked on. When Michael and Sheriff Davis entered the barn, Tony immediately recognized the threat and turned his anger toward them. "Who called the cops? This is a private event. You have no right to be here." "Mrs. Mason asked us to come," Sheriff Davis replied calmly, "and I understand there was an assault." "Assault? That's ridiculous, Tony scoffed, but his voice had risen an octave. We had a family disagreement. Tell them, Amanda. All eyes turned to my daughter, still beautiful in her wedding gown, but now pale and confused. For the first time I saw doubt in her eyes as she looked between her new husband and me, standing with my red-marked cheek beside the sheriff. Tony hit my mom, she finally said, her voice barely audible. I saw it. Tony's face contorted with rage. Whose side are you on? We talked about this. The plan was always to get the farm. The raw admission stunned the room into silence. Amanda took a step back from him, shock registering on her face. Sir, I'm going to need you to calm down, Sheriff Davis said, moving closer to Tony. Instead of complying, Tony lunged toward me. This is your fault you turned her against me. As Sheriff Davis restrained him, something fell from Tony's pocket, a small bag of white powder that skittered across the floor. Well, said the sheriff, picking it up. What do we have here? That's not mine, Tony protested, but his eyes darted nervously. Michael stepped forward, opening a folder he'd brought with him. Mrs. Mason, I have the information you requested about Mr. Clark. He handed copies to Sheriff Davis. Mr. Clark has been investigated for real estate fraud in 3 states. He targets properties owned by single women, particularly widows marries into families when necessary, and has been linked to Apex Development Group, which is currently under federal investigation. Tony's face drained of color. That's a lie. Those charges were dropped. Because witnesses were intimidated into silence, Michael continued. But the FBI has reopened the case. Sheriff Davis nodded grimly. Mr. Clark, you're under arrest for assault possession of a controlled substance and will be coordinating with federal authorities on the fraud investigation. As the sheriff handcuffed Tony, he became hysterical, shouting threats and accusations. You'll regret this. I have rights. That farm is as good as mine. Amanda will still inherit everything. I watched as the man who had nearly become part of my family was led away, still shouting. The elegant wedding he'd planned now in ruins. Through it all, Amanda stood motionless in her white dress, tears streaming down her face. When our eyes met, she looked away, shame evident in her expression. Martha appeared at my side, putting a supportive arm around my shoulders. Let's get you inside, she murmured, leading me toward the house as shocked guests began to disperse. Once inside, I discovered Tony's betrayal went deeper than I'd feared. My office had been thoroughly searched, with documents displaced and file cabinets left open. On the desk sat a stack of papers, copies of deeds, bank statements, and tax records that Tony had clearly been collecting over time. Later that night, as Martha stayed with me in the quiet house, I heard a soft knock at my bedroom door. Amanda stood there, changed out of her wedding gown into jeans and a sweater, her face puffy from crying. Mom, she began, before words failed her. I wanted to comfort her, to tell her everything would be okay. But the truth was, nothing felt okay at that moment. Both of us had difficult roads ahead. We'll talk tomorrow, I said quietly. Get some sleep. She nodded and turned away, and I was left wondering if the damage to our relationship could ever be repaired. The days following the wedding disaster were some of the most difficult of my life. News spread quickly through our small community, bringing unwanted attention and gossip. Amanda refused to leave her old bedroom, overwhelmed by humiliation and betrayal. Tony was released on bail after 2 days with orders to stay away from me and my property. His lawyer immediately began damage control, claiming Tony had been misunderstood and that the cocaine found in his possession wasn't his. Despite the restraining order, he called Amanda repeatedly until she finally blocked his number. When Amanda emerged from isolation after 3 days, our conversation was painful. How could you embarrass me like that? She demanded, still somehow blaming me for what had happened. In front of everyone. Amanda, I replied carefully. Tony assaulted me. He admitted to planning to take the farm from us. He's being investigated for fraud. Maybe he just got carried away, she said, though her voice lacked conviction. He was under a lot of pressure with the wedding. I realized then how deeply Tony had manipulated her. Honey, this wasn't a mistake or a bad day. This was a calculated plan. Michael found evidence that Tony has done this before, 3 times. I showed her the file Michael had compiled newspaper articles about Tony's previous relationships with wealthy women whose assets mysteriously transferred to his control. Records of lawsuits that were suddenly dropped. Documentation of his connection to development companies that stripped and flipped valuable properties. As reality sank in, Amanda's anger turned to devastating shame. I brought him into our lives, she whispered. I believed everything he said. I defended him to you. You're not the first person to be deceived by someone like Tony, I told her. He's practiced at manipulation. But my words offered little comfort. 2 days later, Amanda packed her bags. I can't stay here, she said, eyes downcast. Everyone knows what happened. I need space to figure things out. Where will you go? I asked, heartbreaking at the thought of her leaving when she was so vulnerable. Lisa offered me her spare room in Portland for a while. Lisa had been Amanda's college roommate, one of the few friends who'd attended the wedding. You don't have to go, I said. We can get through this together. But Amanda's mind was made up. I'm sorry, Mom, she said as she got into her car. For everything. Then she was gone, leaving me alone with a farm that suddenly felt emptier than it had since Harold's death. The financial strain soon added to my emotional burden. The wedding had been expensive, and many vendors refused refunds despite the circumstances. Tony had also convinced Amanda to invest in his business ventures, depleting her savings. Now those investments were frozen, pending investigation. Throughout these challenges, my community became my lifeline. Martha checked on me daily. Neighboring farmers helped with harvests when I fell behind. Even Sheriff Davis stopped by regularly, updating me on the case against Tony and making sure I felt safe. He's facing serious charges, the sheriff assured me. Between the assault, the drugs, and the fraud investigation, he'll be tied up in court for a long time. One rainy afternoon, while sorting through old boxes in the attic, I found my grandmother's journals. Reading her words from the 1940s, I discovered our farm had faced threats before. During World War II, opportunists had tried to pressure her into selling while my grandfather was overseas fighting. She'd stood firm, finding innovative ways to keep the farm productive with limited resources. Land is more than dirt and deeds, she'd written. It's the story of who we are and what we've survived. No price can be set on such things. Her words strengthened my resolve. If she could protect our legacy during wartime as a young woman alone, I could certainly weather my current storm. Meanwhile, Tony's case moved slowly through the legal system. His lawyers filed motion after motion for delays while attempting to negotiate plea deals. Each postponement felt like extending the shadow over my life and Amanda's. 3 months after the wedding, Amanda finally called. Our conversation was brief and awkward, but it was a start. She'd found a job in Portland and begun therapy to process what had happened. I'm sorry I blamed you, she said before hanging up. You were right about him. Those words, though simple, began the long process of healing between us. Over the following weeks, our calls became more regular, though we carefully avoided discussing Tony or the farm's future. 4 months after the wedding, Martha came to me with a surprising suggestion. You remember my nephew Michael? Of course, I replied. I couldn't have handled this mess without him. Well, she said with a small smile, he's expanded his practice to include agricultural law. He's helping several farms in the county with succession planning and conservation easements. Might be worth talking to him about options for preserving the farm long term. Though focused on recovery, I couldn't help wondering what would happen to the land after me. Would Amanda ever want to return? Could the farm's legacy continue? These questions kept me awake at night as winter settled over Montana. 6 months after the disastrous wedding day, Tony's case finally went to trial. The evidence against him was substantial documentation of previous fraud schemes, testimony from past victims, financial records showing his plans for the farm, and of course the assault witnessed by 200 people. Amanda returned to Montana for the trial, staying in a hotel rather than at the farm. The distance between us remained, but it had narrowed. We drove to the courthouse together each day, sitting side by side as Tony's crimes were methodically laid bare. He looked smaller somehow in his court attire, his charm entirely evaporated. When Amanda testified about how he'd gradually isolated her from me, changed her perception of the farm, and convinced her that developing the property was the only sensible option, Tony couldn't meet her eyes. He told me Mom was becoming forgetful and incapable of managing the farm, Amanda stated clearly for the record. He said if we didn't take control soon, she'd lose everything and have nothing to leave me. He made it sound like we were helping her. On the final day of testimony, Tony's former business partner revealed how they had targeted my farm, specifically after researching valuable agricultural properties owned by widows in scenic areas. Clark specialized in accessing properties through marriage when direct purchase wasn't possible. The man testified as part of his plea deal in the larger fraud case. The Mason farm was ideal, isolated debt-free with only 2 family members involved. The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours before finding Tony guilty on all counts. As the judge announced the verdict, I felt no joy. Only relief that this chapter was ending, and perhaps some vindication that my instincts had been correct. Outside the courthouse, reporters asked how we felt about the outcome. "Justice was served," I said simply, "but there are no winners here." That evening, Amanda came to the farm for the first time since she'd left. We sat on the porch swing, where I'd spent so many evenings with Harold, watching the sunset paint the fields in gold and pink. "I should have listened to you," she said after a long silence. "You tried to warn me, and I shut you out." "You were in love," I replied. Tony knew exactly what he was doing. He was skilled at manipulation. "But I let him come between us," she continued, tears filling her eyes. "I almost let him steal everything you and Dad worked for." I took her hand. "But he didn't succeed. We stopped him." "You stopped him," Amanda corrected. "I was too blind to see what was happening." We talked until the stars emerged, really talked for the first time in years. Amanda shared how Tony had subtly undermined her confidence, isolated her from friends who questioned their relationship, and gradually reframed her perception of me and the farm. He would say things like, "Your mum means well, but she's stuck in the past," or, "It's sad watching her struggle with the farm when we could help her have a comfortable retirement," Amanda explained. "It happened so gradually that I didn't realize how he was changing my thinking." As painful as these revelations were, they helped me understand how my smart, independent daughter had fallen under Tony's influence. 2 weeks later, Amanda surprised me by announcing she'd accepted a job with an agricultural technology company in Bozeman, just an hour from the farm. "It's a good opportunity," she explained, "and I want to be closer to home." Home. The word filled me with hope. Over the following months, Amanda visited regularly on weekends. Initially awkward, our relationship gradually strengthened as we worked together on small projects around the farm. She brought fresh ideas for sustainable practices and helped modernize our record-keeping systems. Ironically, the very thing Tony had used as an excuse to access our documents. One Sunday afternoon, as we planted a new apple tree in the orchard, Amanda broached the subject we'd been avoiding. "Mom, what do you want for the farm's future? I know I haven't shown much interest in it before, but now you're seeing it differently," I suggested. She nodded. "I always saw it as Dad's dream, then your responsibility." I never considered it might be part of my future too. Together, we began developing a new vision for the Mason family farm. Amanda's business background complemented my practical experience. We launched educational programs inviting school groups to learn about sustainable agriculture. We expanded the farm store into a weekend market featuring products from neighboring farms. We even converted one of the smaller outbuildings into a farm-stay cottage that quickly became popular with tourists seeking an authentic rural experience. None of these changes compromised the farm's integrity or purpose. Instead, they ensured its sustainability for the future. The land remained in production, our family legacy intact but evolving. Nearly a year after the wedding, that never should have been, I sat with Martha on my porch, watching Amanda lead a group of visiting students through the fields. "You've come through the storm stronger," Martha observed. "We both have," I replied, thinking of how Amanda had transformed from Tony's victim to a confident partner in the farm's operations. She now lived in Bozeman, but spent at least 3 days a week at the farm, learning everything from equipment maintenance to crop rotation. "You know what your grandmother would say," Martha smiled. "Tough times don't last, but tough women do." I laughed, recognizing the truth in those words. The farm had weathered many challenges over generations, and so had the women who loved it. That evening, Amanda joined me for dinner. As we enjoyed fresh vegetables from our fields, she hesitated before sharing her latest idea. "I've been thinking about building a small house on the north corner of the property," she said. "I could live here part-time at first, then maybe eventually." She didn't need to finish the thought. I understood she was finding her way back to the land on her own terms and in her own time. "I think your father would like that very much," I told her, my heart full. And so would I. The true value of our family farm wasn't in its development potential or market price. It was in the connections it fostered, the legacy it preserved, and the strength it brought out in those who cherished it. Tony had seen the land only as a commodity to be exploited. He'd failed to understand that its worth lay in something that couldn't be bought or sold. Sometimes the hardest moments in life reveal the most important truths. In standing up to Tony, I'd rediscovered my own strength. In losing and finding each other again. Amanda and I had forged a deeper bond, and in protecting our heritage, we'd ensured it would remain vital and meaningful for years to come. Sometimes life's worst moments can lead to our best beginnings. You might lose faith in a person, but never lose faith in yourself. Have you ever had to stand up against pressure to give up something important to you? Share your story in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe and hit that like button if this resonated with you. Thank you for listening, and remember, true strength isn't about never falling, it's about rising every time we fall.